Hi, everyone. My name is Kasia. Welcome to the Leadership Adventure PodQuest. Today, I have our guest, Nathaniel, who I was really looking forward to talking to because I feel Nathaniel's work is so important to everyone today in the very busy world that we live in. Nathaniel is joining us from South Africa, and he's the founder of Life Force Upgrade. He's a health optimization expert. And I love his focus on energy and creativity and being able to create a sense of sustainability in our health and our lives in that busy culture that we live in. Welcome, Nathaniel. I'd love to just start by asking you about the twists and turns in your life that have led you to focus on health optimization.
Thank you so much, Kasia, and it's great to be here with your audience and yourself. So, yes, my story actually begins as a young boy. Uh, my brother introduced me to the martial art KungFu, and since that time, I really got interested in human anatomy, physiology, and how the body works. And that was great, but eventually I had to truly dive in deep and utilize this knowledge for my own health. One of the first twists and turns, like you said, that I went through was at 21. I actually went through lung failure, well, the process. So it started off with, for a full month, I had what some people would term the cough of death, where you hear someone coughing like that and you say, go and see a doctor. And the doctors, basically all they could offer at that time was antibiotics, and they weren't working. And so I had to dive in deep into how can I correct this, where you're not just, working on the symptoms. And I went through some challenges in that. I started doing some specific things to strengthen the lungs and to clear the system out. And my lungs came back, and it was a gift in my life, because looking back, it put me on the path initially to understand health more so. Also seeing a lot of people around me suffering with different things. And then uh, carrying on into my late 20s, my health broke down completely. I went through, a lot of things came up at the same time. I was living in a moldy house. I later learned that for some people, black mold toxins that they release can be a problem. I was living on a busy road with lots of trucks and the exhaust fumes. I was super financially stressed. I'd gone through a breakup. Everything kind of just compounded, and I started to get severe symptoms of, the doctors were saying, rheumatoid arthritis and also multiple sclerosis, these sort of autoimmune issues, which is a big rise in the world. Also got chronic fatigue, which as a young Kung Fu man shocked me that I couldn't get up and train, or if I trained hard, I would be out for like the next 2 weeks. And also what started to happen was severe gut issues, which what I teach now, the gut is one of the greatest foundations we have to health. And so I went from 67 kilograms actually down to 57 kilograms. I lost all my lean muscle mass, and it was pretty severe. I won't go into details, but when my health completely broke down like that, I realized I'd been studying a lot on health optimization, but never really consistently implementing it. And now, when this dire situation occurred, that's where I dived in deep. I started to become consistent. I went to the fundamentals, and eventually it took almost 5 years, but I came right again. I strengthened my body. The mind and emotions play a big role, managing stress. And now today, I help people do the same.
Thank you for sharing. I'm curious, was the lung failure caused by the mold that was present in the house? Do you know?
No, this was many years before I actually entered the moldy house.
Okay.
Um, for that lung failure, actually the biggest thing that I found at that time to help me get right was working on suppressed emotional turmoil and trauma.
Wow.
I had suppressed something so deeply, and the mind body connection is so strong that I went through a process of forgiveness. And that's actually one, at that time, I learned how powerful stress can affect the body. It was mostly
Mm-hmm.
self induced stress, actually.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think stress is such an interesting, experience that we go through because certainly you do notice it physically if you pay attention, right? And I find what we pay attention to is so vital. If we notice what it's doing, then we can actually really pay attention to reducing that impact and actively being a participant in our health. And if we don't notice that it's, causing havoc with our body or tightening, I was recently, just noticing where stress is actually affecting my muscles, right? Is it in the chest? Is it in the stomach? And that's something I started really paying attention to when my mother went through cancer, because going through that process, she was starting to get so tight in the chest and in the throat that she could hardly breathe properly and function properly. So I know that that can have a tremendous impact on health and well-being and how we function day to day. What would be, your thinking around this? Do you feel that chronic stress does lead to chronic illness on a regular basis?
Definitely. I mean, even medical science agrees that from what I've seen, 90% plus of chronic illness is stress induced. And it's not to say that stress is a bad thing. Stress can be a very good thing when it's the right dose and we're able to manage it properly. I like what you said about paying attention to the body because that's where it starts. It's first just a little whisper, and then we kind of push on. Then it's a little knock on the door. Then it's a tap on the shoulder, and eventually it's the body just shouts at you, and that's generally where the chronic illness comes through. And the thing about stress is that if if we keep activating the system of stress where the adrenals kick in a bit and the body is prepared to fight or flight. That's the traditional terminology. But I will say stress hormones have actually been used in human organ transplant to turn off the immune system so that the organ is accepted. So if we constantly leak in stress, so to speak, into the system, then we turn in off our digestive process, we turn in off the immune system, and eventually the body starts to go into catabolism where the tissues break down.
Mm-hmm. It's
Yeah,
a fascinating thing to think about, right? And everyone in this day and age, I think, is needing to be aware of that and those connections, right? To be aware of
yeah,
how it can impact, because I do see a lot of people living in stress for a long period of time. Often that's because of their workload. Currently I have some clients that are working two jobs because of the layoffs that happened last year, or because they're having trouble finding people to fit certain roles. So there can be various different reasons for that compounding stress. And at the same time, I'm curious if people can do something about that without changing their situation to help them manage that. What are your thoughts?
all right, I love that. So it's true. We're not monks living in a temple. We all have lives to live here, and we got work to do. So, like you said, without changing anything drastically, one of the key pillars that I find is very helpful is breath regulation. Now, breath regulation just simply means Number one, awareness is key, like you said, because when we feel overwhelmed by stress, generally for most people, what starts to happen, they tend to breathe more into just the upper chest. And there's actually panic receptors in the upper chest. So when you have that high sort of breathing and through the mouth, you slowly actually sustaining that stressful state. So one of the best ways to counteract that, so to speak, is to simply breathe light, slow, and deep. So what happens is the vagus nerve, which helps regulate our stress response, it comes out of the brainstem down into the body, inundate. What's the word? It basically weaves through our organs, and the diaphragm. If we're in that panic mode, the diaphragm won't lower properly, and the diaphragm actually helps activate that vagus nerve to signal to the physiology that everything is all right. But if we don't know how to do that, we tend to go more towards that anxiety and depleting the body of vital resources, especially things like minerals. And so in terms of regulating stress, that's a great one, is to just learn proper nasal diaphragmatic breathing. Because also another thing that people don't know about it is carbon dioxide is actually a great thing for us, not when it's in excess, because when we have enough, you'll see sometimes people, when they're overwhelmed with stress, they might breathe into a brown paper bag because they actually want to recapture the carbon dioxide. So it's counterintuitive, but when we get panicked and stressed and we mouth breathe and upper chest breathe, we actually lose carbon dioxide. Now, for the body to calm down and feel safe, and also in the brain, we want to build up a little carbon dioxide, and that comes through proper nasal breathing and diaphragmatic breathing.
And what about, one of the things, because I have noticed when people are quite anxious, there's often shallow breathing associated with that. But when they try to breathe deeper, they can start to feel like they're hyperventilating. What's the difference in how you can breathe into your diaphragm and not have that sensation?
Okay, I love that. There's a lot of nuance to that, because when I first started teaching this, a lot of the cues were to belly breathe. Now, yes, when you use the diaphragm properly, even if you use the diaphragm properly, your belly doesn't have to push out. But in general, when you're relaxed and the diaphragm lowers, there's space that the organs make and they push out. But remember, the lungs are in the chest. It's not in the stomach. So I found that using the word belly breathing can be overwhelming, like you say, for some, because now it almost now, like you say, exacerbates the stress, because they're thinking, to calm down, I need to get the air deep. But then it's kind of like, how do I get it there? So instead of being concerned about the diaphragm or anything like that at first, the best way to get into it that I found is to first work with the side of the ribs. So that can be as simple as putting your hands on the sides of the ribs. And what you want to do is you want to bring your full awareness and attention to the process and let the air slowly fill it without trying to force it in. Because as soon as we force it and we have poor breathing mechanics, there you've activated the stress signal again.
Mm-hmm.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
It does. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think, these are all things that it can be hard to know in those moments that you really need to have that information. And I have been observing this more and more over the last few years, as I'm working with people. It's certainly not my area of expertise. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. I'm curious as well, these aside from managing stress and breath work, what do you think is also the most important to pay attention to in terms of being able to function at our best in terms of our creativity and having access to that? Because I see that being lost in that sense of urgency as well, to really be able to think clearly, to focus. What's most important in your opinion?
Okay, wow. I would say start with the gut and the lymphatic system. So why I say this is because some people may be familiar nowadays. The gut is actually being called the second brain. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason for this is that it's got the gut itself has a lot of nerves in it. You can actually, if you had to scrape out all of the nerve tissues out of the gut and weigh it, it actually weighs more than the spinal cord itself, just to give people an idea of how much is happening there. And if the gut isn't functioning at a high level, what's going to happen is our neurotransmitters for the brain are going to suffer, because as more and more research comes out, they've shown now that the microbes in your gut communicate with the brain through the vagus nerve. There's actually more signals going from your gut to your brain than from your brain to your gut. And if your gut becomes inflamed, it's going to affect you systemically, your energy levels, and also it's going to cause inflammation in the brain. If you have inflammation in the gut, you'll have inflammation in the brain, and then your resilience to stress is going to decrease. That creativity is going to diminish because of the brain fog. And so correcting and looking at gut health is crucial for all things healthy physiology.
And how would you suggest to go about that?
All right. So when we look at the gut, what I get most people to do is just a standard gut reset. I say standard, it's from my system that I teach, but meaning you want to come back to a baseline. So number one, you need to take out of the diet for, I'm not saying people need to be a purist and eat extremely strict and all that, but it can be helpful for a period of time, like even 2 weeks to 3 months, depending on the severity. You want to remove all potential inflammatory foods. You also want to start looking at short bouts of fasting. Fasting has become, a bit of a fad in today's world. For me, it's just a tool. People can overdo fasting, but to give the gut a break every now and then from digestion, and a break could mean also simply no snacks between meals. That's simple. And another part of it would be don't dilute your meal with liquids. It sounds very simple, but I've had people have amazing results just from this one thing alone. That's simply, a lot of people like a cold beverage with their meal generally. Now, what happens is you're going to reduce your stomach acid and dilute the enzymes, and that's going to cause the food to start becoming inflammatory inside the gut and maybe even damage the gut wall.
Mm-hmm. It's
So,
interesting
yeah.
because my mother actually, when my parents come for dinner, I was amused there because my partner always puts water on the table with our meals.
Yes.
And my mother always comments that that's a bad idea. So she's actually been studying this quite in depth to, really take care of her health after she had cancer, to really understand her body. And I think that those are, interesting things to be aware of. What do you think, really needs to happen for people to attend to their health, to pay attention earlier before they get to that state of having a serious illness that really makes them wake up and start to, focus and give their time and energy to this type of knowledge and changes in behavior to sustain their health?
Because yeah, that's one of the questions of my life. But I love it. It's very true. Unfortunately, in a way, a lot of us grow through pain. In Japan, there's a word. It's Kensho and Satori. Anyway, regardless of the words, there's a way to grow through pain, and there's a way to grow through vision. That's kind of what I've come to find, is that if we have a clear vision for our future and how we want to feel, then most often we don't need to wait until right at the end when, like you say, now we deep into chronic illness, or it's the further you go down that path, the harder it is to stop the train and turn around. So I would encourage people not to wait until something breaks down, and it's rather just invest, like in financial investment, invest in your health, put some good health into the bank, so to speak, and have that vision for yourself of how you want to age. In what I teach, I say you can either age or you can sage. Meaning we everyone's going to age, and we're going to continue on our journey, but I think to feel that feeling of vitality as that happens, it's very possible and has been demonstrated over and over.
I'd love to understand a little bit more about that sense of vitality and energy, right? Because energy, and I like how you framed this, that our whole life revolves around the energy that we have. And with so many people being affected by burnout in their roles, I look at this from a few different angles. And the angle I often look at is helping the leaders that I work with shift their focus and skills, and really move away from problem solving on behalf of others to helping others take more ownership and taking a coaching approach. So we focus on that area to help them have more energy by better delegation and better leadership. But I'd really love to understand, in addition to some of these things like integrating meditation practice, which I do find helps with energy, making sure that we are sleeping, a certain period of time. What do you think are the most important things to boost energy? And I know that that's a huge question, right? Because we've got, of course, sleep, nutrition, hydration. What do you think is absolutely core and simple to start with, to start seeing ourselves, having more energy for the things that really matter?
Okay, so I love that you mentioned sleep, because actually in today's world, sleeping has actually become more of an art form to get right. A lot of people I know struggle with sleep, and even if they do sleep, they often not getting deep restorative sleep. Probably one of the best ways to know is, when I wake up, am I actually re-energized for the day? Because a lot of people wake up and it's just reach for the coffee, reach for the sugar, try to get going. But there are numerous ways we can go about it. One of the best ways is actually recalibrating the circadian rhythm. That word's coming up more and more for people to see, but it's really important, because it's only in the last 50, 100 years that a lot has changed in technology and what we're able to do in terms of staying up late and the different light spectrums. Why I mentioned circadian rhythm for sleep, it's also for hormones, and hormones relate to our energy, meaning when the sun rises, when it's at noon, and when it sets, it signals it's a whole field of study now called circadian biology. it has an immensely powerful impact as to the timing of our hormones. I'll give you a small example. People are scared of cortisol in today's world. Too much cortisol, and yes, it's a negative thing when any hormone is circulating for too long. But cortisol in the morning needs to actually rise, and that's like a natural coffee. That's what helps us to actually get going and move into the day. So, to get sleep right and circadian rhythm, all one needs to do is follow the sun. And I know it's not always the easiest thing to do, but a lot of us stay indoors and we don't actually get proper light exposure because the way the eyes work with it's a part of the brain, our circadian clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus or something like that. If that isn't getting signaled properly, a lot of people wear sunglasses, which isn't a bad thing if you have glare, but the thing is it's not signaling your hormonal system properly through that if we're doing that. And then another part of it is a lot of blue light at night. So, you know, historically, we would have just had fire or candles or something like that. But the blue light at night signals to our body literally that it's still daytime. So you're still going to start running the daytime hormones. And then it's going to be very hard to get that deep sleep and recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah, I
go.
was just thinking about some of the clients that have shared with me that they really have trouble getting off their phone at night, right? So they'll either be watching YouTube on their phone, and it's really quite a lot closer to your face than perhaps a TV used to be, which my parents still watch. Do you feel that that closeness has an impact as well in terms of the blue light?
Yeah, in terms of the blue light, but also in terms of stimulating the sympathetic nervous system, which is excitatory. In the brain, it's the glutamate system. So when you have when the more you narrow your focus, the more of the times in nature, so to speak, when you narrow your focus is if you like need that adrenaline, like you're hunting or you've been chased by a predator. But it might seem subtle. Maybe someone feels relaxed and comfortable, even sometimes falls asleep looking at their phone, but subtly it's stimulating the excitatory neurotransmitters of the body.
It's so interesting, because it's really such a huge change in these last generations. And with kids having access to phones, often phones are used as a babysitter these
Mm-hmm.
days. I'm curious what your thoughts are about the impact of that.
My hair stood up a little bit, but I'm a very hopeful, person for the future. It's just how it's happened now. Something to consider is like these phones are literally with all the apps and different things are designed to hold our attention. So especially for a young, and I actually saw a study not too long ago, the impact it's having on young children and teenagers. It's really not good for development. I think it needs to be looked at, and parents should just have a greater awareness of the impact it has because also the dopamine hijack, so to speak, that happens. If you keep depleting your dopamine without doing actual proper work, that's where people can get your energy goes down, your motivation goes down, your drive goes down, and it gets harder and harder to actually find joy in the small things in life, like looking at a sunset. Now, instead, you need like so much stimulation just to feel somewhat alive. So it's a problem, but there's solutions too.
That's fascinating. So when you say depleting dopamine, that's um, from the dopamine hit that you get from getting the stimulation on a regular basis. That's what you mean.
Exactly. It's the same way that stimulants work, natural or synthetic, and we've seen the effects that that has on people. So it's the same thing basically.
hmm It's fascinating. And, one of the things that I think is also really interesting is that with all this external focus that we have on phones, etc., on screens, we have less time for ourselves and our own, thoughts, right? Our own reflection, our own ability to create and to create those visions of what we really want. So I see that it impacts quite heavily on people being able to connect with themselves and understand really what their priorities are, what they are focusing on. So it's really breaking up that focus and ability to take initiative, because we're constantly just responding and reacting as a culture, right? And
Mhm.
it does concern me, and it's something that we really try to work on out of necessity to be able to function in leadership and in executive roles. We really need people to be thinking clearly and creatively, because at the moment we're navigating so much change, and with things like AI changing business so heavily, it's incredibly important. So with all of these shifts in technology over the past, number of years, and all of these waves of change, it's created a reaction that, I think wasn't necessarily considered when it was created, right? So I'm, thinking, what are the most important things that you see that are the easiest sort of quick things that people can take action on as a starting point? Because I feel that once we can start, it's easier to build on that foundation. What can people really do differently? And, you feel that is most important, starting tomorrow.
Okay. So you mean just for overall vitality, or more so for the phone and the dopamine, that sort of thing?
Well, we can start with the phone and dopamine, but of course, I'm interested in the overall picture of how you see
Okay.
this.
Okay, yeah. So uh take a dopamine detox, get uncomfortable, get bored, because remember, boredom can actually lead to creativity. It's hard for people in today's world generally to sit with themselves, and I like that you mentioned the meditation too, because um, the tools are great, the social media tools, the technology tools, but you want to use the tool. You don't want the tool to use you. So I would actually put this in here is some form of meditation where, like you said, we turn our attention inwards, because it's so in a world with so much stimulus, it's actually very therapeutic, even though it may be challenging. And also, the more challenging going inward seems, the more you actually grow from it. It's can you sit in the fire and actually just be with yourself and see what you are actually thinking about in general, because those consistent, I call it like on a computer, when you have too many windows open and there's just so much going on, you do want to at times just close off some of those windows, because that will definitely affect our energy levels.
Hmm. I'm certainly guilty of having too many windows open that I want to go back to, and I have to constantly work on closing them down.
We all do.
And in terms of that greater sense of vitality, energy, what do you think is the most important these days?
Okay, so what I earlier you also pointed towards nutrition and hydration, those sort of
Hmm.
things.
Hmm.
I want to mention, yeah, a lot of people kind of look for, can I take this supplement? Which thing can I take? So those are all helpful and handy, but if you don't have a baseline of nutrition, your body won't even be able to effectively use the fancy stuff. So something I'll mention is mineralization, because the whole electrical system of our body, DNA replication, cellular renewal, the production of energy. It all requires these minerals. So the most common ones that people know is things like sodium, potassium, magnesium. And there's also a whole array of trace minerals. Now, if you're deficient in minerals, you're not going to be able to efficiently produce enzymes. If you're deficient in enzymes, your whole energy system is going to be lagging. So if you want the light bulb turned on, so to speak, an analogy I like to give is if you run conduction through water that's distilled and you connect it to a light bulb, the light bulb won't turn on. You need minerals in that solution for the electricity to actually conduct. So it's a similar situation in our cells and the cellular communication and our mitochondria producing ATP. So yes, minerals is key. And then I also want to mention the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. Minerals work in conjunction with those vitamins. If you are deficient in these, then yes, you will. It's going to be hard if you're pushing yourself. And like you said, we need clarity and energy to adapt in a rapidly shifting world. It will be a struggle. And also, the longer you push into your energy reserves and you don't replenish them, then the more the body will break down.
So let me ask you, things like a water filter, which filter out, I believe, impurities, but also minerals. What's your take? Is it a yes or a no?
Yes, so that I love that. So for me personally, I don't think it's a good idea to drink purified water just like that. You do want to remineralize it somewhat. But I'll also say if you don't have access to clean water, it's better to drink purified water and at least get some minerals through your food, which is available in nutrient-dense foods, than drinking dirty water, because that's one of the foundations is a lot of people don't have access to clean water actually still. So I would say don't be concerned about removing impurities and the good stuff from the water. Start with clean water and you can always remineralize. That's my sort of take on it.
Right. And, you mentioned the supplements. Do you feel that supplements are absorbed in the same way as, food and the enzymes the enzyme production being equal, or do you think that there is a difference?
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of nuance to that question. Put in a nutshell, I would always opt for real food over supplements. I would always look at, if you do supplements, try find whole food forms. So it's like kind of like a food concentrate in a capsule. But then I think there are times, especially depending on how far one wants to go with it, supplements can be very useful. But like I said, if you don't have a foundation of gut health, I don't, to me, and you haven't regulated your stress levels, you could be eating the best stuff on the planet, spend $100,000 on whatever supplements. If your stress is high, you won't even utilize it properly. So I would look at first stress regulation and get in a foundation of gut health first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it's really all connected, of course. And sometimes I think it's easy to forget that, right? Because there are quite a few things to keep in mind. And, talking to you, for me, I have a biochemistry degree, which is quite old these days. But what I found is when studying biochemistry, everything was sort of, outside of the human body, looking at these relationships outside of the human body and not actually connecting how all these systems come together, right? And so I feel like that was a really important piece that was missing from that education. And even for someone like myself who has that actual educational background, it's harder to put it into practice in real life. And it was really not until my mother got cancer that we started to take a closer look at what are the changes, what are the things that we really need to be attentive to. And she went out and bought a bunch of supplements, right? And started to eat differently as well. It just really made me reflect on that idea of whether supplements are truly, helpful, or whether it is most important to have a healthy diet. And I try my best to eat a colorful diet and mix my colors and, make it attractive. But also I know then that I'm getting different types of, energy sources in that food. And when I look at the number of supplements that my mother was taking, it just actually makes me concerned whether that's healthy, because I know that there are certain additives as well, right, in each supplement. So I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. Is there anything else that you feel it's important for people to be aware of around supplements?
Yes, thank you for sharing that. It's so true what you say, because also in terms of the biochemistry, the body works in a symphony. It's just a word, symphonetic, or it works in a symphony of a whole system. Everything communicates with each other. It's not in isolation. So the supplement industry, I would ask people just to look into it properly if they decide to use supplements, because it's actually not as well regulated as like, say, the pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
There is, I'll say it's there's a lot of junk out there. There's a lot of synthetic forms which aren't actually working so well with the body. I'll give you one example real quick, is folic acid. Now, folic acid is very often given to, say, pregnant women for the neurological development of the baby and things like that. Now, they found out recently with DNA testing, because we didn't have this technology before.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 40 to 45% of the population can't actually convert folic acid into what's called methylfolate. So you need it in the folate form for the body to actually use it. So if you're taking copious amounts of folic acid and you can't do the conversion, it actually harms the body.
Mm-hmm.
So these are definitely things to consider. You'll look at a supplement ingredient list and there's all these different forms, but now they've shown some of the forms aren't that good for everyone.
Yeah.
So it's better to take less of a broad spectrum approach and get focused when it comes to supplements. And I think when it also comes to that supplement for deficiency specific, that's probably the best, safest way to do it, instead of just, oh, I think I need more magnesium, or, that sort of thing.
Right. And what about protein? Because I know a lot of people use protein, right? Especially if they're going
Mhm.
to the gym. Is that potentially a good or bad thing as well?
So, yeah, once again, it will come down to the quality and the sourcing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that industry is also not regulated well at all. If you're gonna use a protein supplement, I would say first ask, why do you need it? But then also, with protein, I would say it's way better to go for whole food, proper sources of protein first. And if you want to additionally add on, you also now got to see, does your gut respond to whey? Most proteins out there are whey based. And for some, and even like, say, vegetarian, vegan forms, they pea protein based. Not everyone's gut works with either one. It might actually cause more gut issues. So, like, even a lot of bodybuilders who are overdoing it, they look kind of muscular and good, but inside, I've heard it from them direct. Their digestion is wrecked, and they're
Mm.
actually in pain inside.
Oh, wow. Okay. And things like for example, I noticed silica is in a lot of supplements. Do you feel that that impacts on, say, the liver, etc., trying to filter these, additional things that are in every capsule?
Yeah, so like you said, also with a lot of the products out there, there's additional additives and fillers and things like that. Some are better than others, but if you take in a concentrated supplement of a specific type and for too long, the body might not even need it or want those sort of things. So in terms of like silica, there are certain forms I think that are beneficial. Certain silica products can also even help detoxify certain chemicals out the body, which is great. Like one of them I know is aluminium.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think one just needs to look into it and not just trust the bottle and say, oh, I think I need this. Like really look into it.
Yeah, yeah, I do find, I think that there is that tendency to reach for the bottle because that seems like the easiest thing to do,
There's
right?
also the placebo effect.
Of course, yes, you're
Yeah.
right. It can be actually harder to find real food these days, of course, right? And a lot of things do have additives as well in food. So I find I spend a lot more time reading labels, and checking what's actually inside. And so it can be a full-time job being healthy, right? Um, and certainly, I wish that we had markets like I used to be able to go to in South America to buy fresh produce and have diverse produce as well, because a lot of the time the quality of the produce isn't the best. Certainly, here in Canada we import a lot. And so as far as, nutrition, what do you think is the most important to focus on to be able to really get that nutrition that you need for your body to function properly?
Okay, so it's one thing I'll start by saying is that it depends on one's goals. And also, I think, like you're saying, it can be quite a handful in today's world to, eat healthily and things like that. I just want to quickly remind people that the mind also plays that big role. So, meaning if one is constantly paranoid about what they're eating and really like strict, that can be strenuous on the digestive system nonetheless. But I think the best way, whether you're eating more meat, whether you don't eat meat, the biggest thing I think is eating real food, single ingredients, as local as possible, organic if you can, and I wouldn't be like overly concerned if it's not organic. It's real food is better than ultra processed food still. And then
Hmm.
also making sure that your digestive processes are functioning well, meaning you're producing your stomach acid properly, your enzymes are being produced properly, and especially your bowel. A lot of people are lacking bowel. Some people have their gallbladders removed, and making sure that one of the best diagnostic tools actually to see how the food is affecting you that you're eating is to look in the toilet bowl. I know it's just what it is, it's a great diagnostic thing to look at because we can see what's happening inside in that way.
Right. Yeah. And I know that the having the gallbladder removed can have a huge impact, right? That's something that my mother had to have a surgery for quite a few years ago, and there are many things that she can't eat. Um, and in terms of going through life, you mentioned aging. I'm curious what you think is the most important, and this is, the wrap up question as we get older. Is there anything that you think is most important to be focusing on to age, to sage rather than age, as you said, to
Yes.
age gracefully and healthily?
Okay. All right. Yes. So what I would say is it comes to, yeah, it will come to the nutrition, but also strength of the body, meaning uh, how much muscle mass do you have, and or have you at least trained the connective tissues to sustain the strength, because connective tissues last longer than muscle actually.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I'll address that part quick. So a lot of when it comes to aging, sometimes people have a misconception that maybe we need to take it more easy, maybe we need to not lift as heavy weights or things like that. I'm not You shouldn't lift heavy weights if straight away. You should build up to it, but I think maintaining at least some muscle mass. So I'm not just talking about like, little light weights or swimming in the pool. I mean, actually straining and working the body in that way, but progressively and in a capacity that's suited to the person. And then also the other one would be looking at lung capacity. Probably lung capacity is one of the biggest predictors of longevity there are, besides grip strength.
Mm-hmm.
So to work on establishing proper breathing biomechanics and then practicing breath holds, which will, like if you look at the free divers, they're a great community in terms of showing lung capacity and that vitality.
Mm-hmm.
And then also a lot of people think maybe to eat less protein as we get into our older years. I would say make sure your digestion's on point, and you don't have to overdo the protein, but make sure you're still getting protein in, because those amino acids from protein breakdown is what we need to continuously renew the body. And you can do that if you're vegan or even carnivores. It can be done.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing, I think, when I've tried vegan cooking or vegetarian cooking by someone who knows what they're doing, it has been incredible. And I really wish that I had that skill set. So it's something that I'm working on to have a bit more variety. And, I think that there are so many different things that we can focus on. I think that you've shed a lot of light today on areas that we can consider are most important for ourselves. Uh, in terms of the work that you do, helping the people that you work with, do you focus on all of these areas, or are there areas that you find people are most interested in when they reach out to you?
Yeah, so a lot of people originally reached out to me to learn about breath work. And yes, that's breath work. A lot of people think of breath work and maybe think of like Wim Hof and hard mouth breathing. It's way deeper than that. That's just one little modality in the whole breathwork world. But overall, it's just learning how to increase your lung capacity, create efficient gaseous exchange. Because remember, the lowest lobes of the lungs has the richest blood supply. We want to keep that active. And then also people come to me just for uh, generally for chronic illness support. So this
Mm-hmm.
can be ranging from things like heartburn all the way to more severe like autoimmune sort of things like that.
Yeah. And how do you work with people? Do you have sessions, or do you have ongoing programs?
Yes, so at the moment I have a 3 month and a 6 month program where we work together one on one. It's very much a coaching program to really assist someone to integrate all the knowledge, and then once they've done that, they can go on their way and they'll have the tools and the knowledge to sustain that. And then I'll also do consultations for people.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, the training that you mentioned to build muscle mass
Mhm.
before aging, right? That's so important because so many people are affected by osteoporosis and then broken hips, etc. That causes a
Mhm.
huge downturn in their ability to live life, right? And be self-sustainable. Um, in terms of training, do you think it's best to work with a personal trainer at the gym? Because I've also heard stories of injuries. I've had that happen myself when I've worked with personal trainers at times where I've had to overextend too quickly and then injured myself and wasn't able to continue for a while, right? So I'm curious what you think about that aspect.
Yeah, so like like you asked before, the what I teach is a holistic system. So it's addressing all the key factors, because I love personal trainers, but in general, most of them just have the single view of, fitness and maybe nutrition. For longevity, super important to train progressively, and personal trainers sometimes can over push their clients. And so to establish a foundation in body mechanics is number one, proper form. You don't want to put a Ferrari engine in a Yaris. You need to build up the capacity for more power. So slow and controlled and with ultimate softness is where I start everyone, because people get enthused and they want to go in and do it, but then, like you said, one little injury, one little wrist injury, shoulder, ankle, it sets back the whole system. So progressively going through it is key.
And I love that analogy, actually, of body mechanics, right? Because essentially that's what we're looking at here. And when you think of your car, right, you have to maintain your car. You have to check things along the way. You don't only take it to the mechanic when it breaks down, right? Whereas I think so much in our society, we only go to the doctor when something breaks down, instead of actually really building in that maintenance into our own lives. And so I think it's important that you're bringing the focus to that. I want to thank you for sharing all you've shared with us today. I think you have a tremendous wealth of knowledge. And I'd love to ask what the best way is for people to reach you if they want to reach out directly.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Kasia. So the best way is actually through Facebook and Instagram. You can find me on Facebook as Nathaniel Dickey, on Instagram as Life Force Upgrade. That's where I connect with most people. But also people can connect with me through email too.
Okay, wonderful. Do you want to share that, or a website link or email here, or?
Yeah, so email is connect@lifeforceupgrade.com.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. I really appreciate your energy and all the wisdom that you've shared with us today.
Can I leave one little tidbit quick?
Of course, yeah.
Just on the strength side, just so people know. At one point I mentioned we're not monks living in a temple. A lot of people think they absolutely need to spend hours and hours in training in the gym. I'm just letting you know it doesn't have to be like that. It can be quick and efficient, 10 minutes to half an hour, even 2 or 3 times a week. Just to and once you build a foundation, it's very easy to maintain.
And so you're saying that 10 minutes or 30 minutes of what is it, cardio or weight training?
Specifically for the strength side. But yes, also that laps into the cardiovascular side too.
Right. So frequency is more important than the time that you spend on those activities, is what you're saying.
I would say so. And the consistency, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that last tidbit. I think that those are all incredibly important things, right? And at least a starting point for some people to change things so that they can be healthier. Thanks once again.
Thank you, Kasia.